Morgan Eisenstadt is a university of
Keep reading.
is at the University of Texas at Austin class of 2018 alum and attended Stevenson High School. Morgan has worked and studied in the field of identities and socio-cultural awareness. Morgan has previously spoken about a variety of identity-related issues, including a TEDx speech in 2016. Morgan identifies as queer and uses she/her pronouns, but would rather be identified in third person by name. Morgan is here today to discuss queer language, the evolution of the queer community and movement, and to facilitate conversation regarding allyship and the outlook for the queer community. Please welcome Morgan Eisenstadt.
Hi everyone. Hello. Thank you so much for coming. I'm sure you're going to hear this a lot tonight. You've already heard it a lot, but it is absolutely amazing to see so many of you here, especially when we're talking about the queer community. This is something where a lot of people don't know how to help, they don't know how to support, and they don't know how to really connect with anything that the queer community is doing. So the fact that you are all here today is mind-blowing to me. So like Molly said, my name is Morgan. Oh, I have a PowerPoint, by the way, if you didn't know. So my name is Morgan. Like Molly said, I went to the University of Texas at Austin. I graduated from Stevenson in 2014. When I moved down to Austin, Texas, I studied studio art and advertising. A lot of what I ended up doing in college, though, was working with interpersonal relationships. In my 4 years at college, I actually had 5 on-campus jobs, give or take. And I was a part of a lot of different organizations, from theater to business, meeting all different kinds of people. But throughout my 4 years, what I did really honed in on social identities and the way that identities play a part in our social interactions and how we see the world, the lens that we see the world through. I don't tell you that just to be super impressive, although if you're impressed, I'm just saying. The reason that I say that is because identity was a big part of my journey. So one of those on-campus jobs actually gave me the platform, the ability, and the space to come out to my parents. My very first year of college, no flash recording. No, I'm joking. My very first year of college, I was given the opportunity to work with incoming students. And part of the application and training process was to understand our own identities. That way we can understand the bias through which we see the world, just to make our interactions with other people a little bit easier, and to make sure that we're always learning. The reason that I say all that is because I want you all to know that I am not an expert. All right? I have not studied queer theory at length. I have not really gone in depth in terms of research. So today I'm only going to talk about my own experience. My experience and what I've learned from other people, my understanding. But the important thing to know is that things that I'm going to talk about today, they're not set in stone. Right? Identity is a very fluid thing. It's constantly being understood better. So what I say today, you might ask someone else tomorrow morning and they may disagree completely, and that's okay. The whole point is that we all bring different perspectives. We're still learning. Identity is not a hard science. It will never be a hard science, and it really never should be a hard science. Take a lot of what I say and use it as sort of a foundational building block to go and learn from others and learn on your own. That's what this is really about. I do want to set a couple of ground rules before we move into sort of the intense conversation. That's really bright, I'm really sorry. First things first, this is a very nuanced and a very sensitive and personal subject. I'm aware. If at any point you're uncomfortable, you just can't be in this room anymore, that's totally okay. Feel free to get up, step out. You can pretend that you're going to the bathroom or you've got a phone call, whatever you need to do. I will not be offended. I promise you that. Take care of yourself first and foremost. That's something that you should always do, but especially in this context. The other note I want to make is that I expect and I hope that you have questions throughout my presentation. If you do, there will be a short Q&A at the end where you can ask those questions of me. I think there are note cards going around, question mark. I say question mark just in case. There are note cards going around. Feel free to write down your questions as they come up. That way at the end, you don't forget them, or if you're uncomfortable asking to the group, I can just address them straight from the note card, if that makes sense. Cool? All right, so I wanted to lay those as sort of the house rules because it's important when we're talking about identity. The other thing that's really important is to lay the foundation that we're going to build on. When I talk about foundation, I'm talking about the language that I'll be using. I think they're being handed out already. There's this like glossary of terms that have these accepted or consensus-based definitions of a variety of different terms you might hear used. Either you've heard them before, you've seen them, you haven't, maybe you don't know how to ask about them. Remember that this is not set in stone. These are not pure definitions because people have different perspectives. The last page also has a list of resources for you and other people that you may know, whether they're in or not within the queer community. All right. That said, there are a couple of terms that I want to talk about in this presentation. I am not going through the whole glossary. I promise. That's like, you can do that on your own. The first word that I want to talk about, just to make sure we're on the same page, is a word that I have already used. It's the word identity. So when I'm talking about identity, that means some sort of self-definition. Broadly speaking, there are two kinds. There's personal identity and there's social identity. Personal identity are going to be the things that you opt into doing. They're the conscious, consistent decision-making. So for example, someone might say, I'm outdoorsy. Someone might say, I'm super geeky, I know every word to every Harry Potter. I identify with one of those. You can guess which. So when we're talking about personal identity, this is something that you choose to put out into the world. Social identity is different. It's hard to define social identity because a lot of people like to say it's the inherent identities that you hold. That's not exactly right because your social identities can change over time as well. So I talk about social identities. These are going to be the typically politically charged identities you hold. Right? Race, religion, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, physical or mental ability or disability, sexuality, gender. When I say that these aren't set in stone for your whole life, what I mean is they change as your understanding of yourself and as your understanding of the language you can use changes. The best way to explain this is imagine you're in a big tunnel. Who you are at your core is at the very end of that tunnel. When you're at the very beginning, you sort of know what's there, you're not quite sure, and as you move throughout the tunnel, or in this case, life, or your learning, you're able to see it more clearly, and you're able to learn more to explain it. So when I talk about that, what I mean is that you may meet someone who identifies as gay today. And in a few weeks, a few months, a few years, they may identify as a straight trans person. Their identity, who they are within, has not changed. But they've gone through a process of self-discovery, they've learned new language, and they've identified something that feels more appropriate. Obviously, today we're going to be talking about social identity, if you haven't picked up on that. The basic difference between the two, and it's important to know, is that personal identity is something that you opt into. You choose to do it. Social identity is something that is deep within, and these are the things that give us the lens through which we see the world. When I talk about social identity, I said it's very political. FYI, this whole thing is political. Being queer is a political statement in today's day and age. That is really awful that we have to say that, but I want you all to know that that is just the reality of being a queer person. Now, when I talk about the word queer, I know that for some of you, that is probably super uncomfortable. Because depending on where and when you grew up and who you grew up around, that was a slur, right? The word queer is the LGBT community. I like to use the word queer. It's, in my mind, more inclusive, and it's more easily and readily understood. Here's the thing. The alphabet soup of the LGBT community, one, it's a mouthful. All right? And two, even queer people don't agree on what it means. So you have LGBT, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender. Most people will agree on that. And then you get the Q. Some people say that this is queer. Some people say it's questioning. Then you have the I. That's intersex. Also something most people agree on. Then you have the A. And the A is where there's a lot of discourse. Some people say it's for allied. Some people say it's for asexual. No one can agree on what these mean. And there's always a plus on it, right? Here's the thing. If you want to talk about the most inclusive alphabet soup that you can get outside of queer, it looks like this. LGBTQIAAP. Try saying that 10 times fast. This stands for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, transsexual, queer, questioning, intersex, allied, asexual, pansexual, and yes, there was probably a plus at the end. So I use the word queer. I know that it used to be a slur, but in the past 5, 6, 7 years, queer people have gone and reclaimed that word as our identity. We identify with it. It's a word that, in my experience, gives me empowerment. Because saying all this, a lot of people don't understand it. A lot of people aren't willing to understand it. I am not asking that you change your language to use the word queer. I understand that for some of you that's going to be uncomfortable. Feel free to use whatever version of the alphabet soup you want. Just understand that during this presentation, I'll be using the word queer to talk about this community. All right? One other thing I do want to mention in terms of language, like I said, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, I promise. But I want to talk about these phrases, gay lifestyle and sexual preference. And the reason I want to bring those up is because they're still being said today. First and foremost, drop that language. Don't use those anymore. Saying the gay lifestyle or sexual preference implies that there is an option, a choice, that someone is constantly making the decision to choose. When you use that kind of language, you're basically saying that being queer is a choice. That someone chooses to be discriminated against. Chooses to have who they are questioned by their friends, families, and strangers. Being queer is not a choice. Period. End of sentence. So just drop that gay lifestyle, sexual preference from your vocabulary altogether. It's like sort of the one thing that I'm going to say is an absolute to do. Just as an FYI. When I'm talking about the queer movement, though, a lot of people think it's gay rights. And that's sort of how it did start out, right? I mean, when we think about the queer movement, we think about gay rights in terms of getting married, right? But the queer movement has changed from that very basic gay rights into the liberation of human sexuality and the understanding of it. Human sexuality, first of all, is not just like a super fun class people take in college. I don't know if that was always been a thing, but I know a lot of people who think that. Human sexuality is a very real thing. And there is queer theory and a whole bunch of women in gender studies professors who can probably go really in depth. I do not have 7 hours, and I'm sure you are not interested in listening to me talk for 7 hours. If you are, let me know. I'm happy to do it. Human sexuality, though, the way that I've learned it, can be broken down sort of into 4 distinct parts. The first one is biological sex. So this is the gender that you were assigned at birth, the sexual reproductive organs that you were born with. I want to make a quick note here. This is not binary, FYI. This is not just male and female. Drop the idea that anything is on some sort of binary. That's just not real. People are born intersex. They're not necessarily always male or female. So keep that in mind when we're talking about biological sex. When we talk about biological sex in the queer movement, it sort of leads into the discussion about gender identity. This is, in its broad, sort of well-accepted definition, your self-identity as to who you are, typically in relation to biological sex. And what I mean by that is a lot of the language we use is based on what you were assigned at birth in terms of gender and sex. There are 2 sort of big umbrella terms that you'll hear. cisgender and transgender. We're talking about cisgender. This is someone who identifies with the gender that they were assigned at birth. So if you were born with male reproductive organs, assigned male at birth, and to this day still identify as male, I'm Miss Pinta.
I'm sorry.
This was actually scripted. You were going to this point.
Wait.
Oh, okay. What a photo op, Kodak moment. Where was I? Oh, cisgender. So that is sort of the default in our society. That's sort of the thing you assume. And then you have transgender, which in its most broad definition means that the gender identity that you hold today does not align with your biological sex or the gender you were assigned at birth. Like I said, there's going to be a lot of discourse within all of this. Me too, buddy. But you'll hear some people that say that trans is only people who are male to female, female to male, trans men and trans women. Then you'll have other people that say that this encompasses non-binary, agender, gender fluid, gender queer people. It just depends on who you ask and how they learned it. I lean towards the latter because the term transgender is very broad. And within that, there are many different identities that you can hold. Gender identity also includes gender expression. So that's the way in which you perform your gender to the world. So this is going to have to do with things like the way you dress, talk, act, the habits you have, a lot of who you take social cues from. That's sort of part of how you develop your gender identity. A very, very important thing about gender identity is pronouns. If someone tells you their pronouns, believe them. Don't make assumptions based on how they look. There are a variety of pronouns. Some people use he, him. There's she, her. There's they, them. There's sie, zir, here, here. If someone says that they identify with some sort of pronouns, use those pronouns. If they tell you their name, use that name. There are a lot of people out there who have dead names. What that means is they use a name now that identifies more with who they are than the name that they had when they were born. Use the name that they tell you they use. If y'all can call Lady Gaga, not Stephanie, you can call someone their actual name. If you don't know how to ask someone about their pronouns, one easy tool that you can do is when you walk up to someone and introduce yourself, say, hey, my name is Joe Schmo and I use he, him pronouns. That tells the other person that you're inviting them to share as well, and that you're conscious of that. It's as easy as that, but that means the world to a lot of different people. Sort of moving throughout the circle, we have sexual orientation. Sexual orientation is who you are physically attracted to. This is where we get the terms lesbian, gay, bisexual, pansexual, asexual. Yes, those are very nuanced, and there's differences between them. I also don't have 7 hours, like I said. But understand that this is who you are physically, sexually attracted to. Fourth piece is romantic orientation. And this is the thing that I think a lot of people forget in my experience, in my conversations. This is who you are emotionally and mentally attracted to, the people that you are likely to have long-term romantic relationships. The best way to describe the difference, and this is not the most considerate way, there's a lot of problems with what I'm about to say, and I recognize that, but this is the best way to understand the difference. You could have a man who is bisexual, attracted to men and women, but may only have long-term relationships with women, only have emotional connections with women. That person, that man would be bisexual, heteroromantic. Does that make sense? The difference? It is nuanced, but it's an important part of people's identity. That example is super problematic. It reduces bisexuality and gender identity, I'm aware, but if y'all got the point, that's important. Human sexuality is at the center of the queer movement, especially within the last few years. So when I talk about the last few years, I'm talking about the last 10. And the reason I use the last 10 is because I'm 23. In case you were wondering. I know y'all were taking bets about it. I look 16, I promise I'm 23. So when I was Molly's age, when I was 12, 13, this stuff wasn't happening. It wasn't a part of my life to know queer people or to see queer people in society. I spent my formative years growing with this movement. So when I talk about the last 10 years, I'm talking about the things that I've seen and I've felt and I've learned. And in the last 10 years, there have been really three major trends with the queer movement. It's going to be the rise of representation, it's going to be the gender revolution, and it's going to be the growth of a community. These are the three trends that I've seen most frequently. So when I talk about the rise of representation, I'm talking about you being able to see public figures and people like you out there in a mass audience. Thank you. When I was a kid, there were 3 TV shows that I knew had queer characters. Will and Grace. Hey, I mean, it came back, it's so good, watch it, just saying. But this had 2 male gay characters. One was extremely flamboyant, right? Jack was just Jack, right? And him being gay was the punchline of jokes. That was his whole character. And then you had Will, who was not like that. And that was so cool to see the fact that gay people are not necessarily these overly flamboyant people. But when they brought up his sexuality, it was always part of a conflict. It was always an issue he was having. Susan and Carol from Friends. Probably the only lesbians that I knew the word lesbian was associated with. And they were the bad guys. They were the ones that hurt Ross. And they were the ones that made Ross feel left out. They were always shown as these sweet women, but they were always bad guys. Then you had Ellen.
Yeah.
But this was, Ellen! Woo! This was early Ellen, though. This was before the Ellen that we all know and love, who talks about all this amazing stuff and being kind to yourself and being kind to others, and was this huge success. This was right after Ellen came out, when her sitcom got canceled, when she was just this random daytime talk show host who people were like, why am I going to watch a lesbian speak? That was the representation. That's changed a lot. GLAAD actually ran a study in 2018, and of the almost 1,000 characters in scripted primetime television, just under 10% were some kind of queer. That's not a lot, FYI. Of the streaming services, so Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, they reported just over 100 queer characters. It's not a lot, is it? But it's better than it was before. Kids, teenagers, adults, people have access to more of these identities, more representation. Talking about shows like Orange is the New Black, One Day at a Time, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, Love, Simon, Modern Family, Academy Award-winning Moonlights, not La La Land. Thank you for those that got it. Marcus Mother, Lee. These were shows that kids, young adults could watch, movies that they could see and see these different kinds of identities represented in a way that I didn't when I was 12 and 13. But I think the most poignant thing about the rise of representation is a Disney TV show called Andy Mack. Yeah, you know it, right? When I was a kid, Disney would never have done this. There is a character on the show who has said on camera that he is gay. He is a kid and he is gay. Do y'all remember when Finding Dory came out and there was a lesbian couple? People freaked out. And Disney Channel has a gay character? Kids have that kind of exposure. That's changing what our lives look like. Because kids are having the opportunity to look and see themselves. But it's not just media. The 2018 elections were a big deal. Not to get super political, although this is political, if you don't vote or know someone that doesn't vote, change that. The people in this room are going to be the people that make the changes. In 2018, we elected our very first gay governor. Yeah. I don't personally know him, but he looks pretty cool. We elected our first openly bisexual woman to Congress. It is so sad that happened in 2018. But it's momentum. Of the 535 people in Congress, 10 of them are queer.
No, I'm saying we have our first openly gay county commissioner in Cook County.
Hey! It's people like that, public figures who are showing not just kids, young adults, teenagers, adults, people who are in their 60s, showing that. I didn't want to say any other things. Now I feel bad. But it's these public figures that are changing the landscape of how people see themselves. They're giving us, they're giving kids, they're giving other adults the opportunity to see themselves represented in the public. And that is huge. That is so different from 10 years ago. With the rise of representation comes the gender revolution. This is a National Geographic cover. This is my favorite National Geographic cover of all time. I know that's a very specific favorite to have. But this is an entire issue about the gender revolution. The gender revolution is such an interesting movement because it's not just a part of the queer community. It branches women's rights, queer people of color, women of color. The basics of the gender revolution is a combating of traditional gender roles and stereotypes. Right? It used to be this thing of if you were a man, you were rough, tough, aggressive, you liked sports and cars, and if you didn't, you weren't a man. If you're a woman, you're expected to be hospitable, docile, crafty, aloof. The gender revolution is saying that is so off base. Because the fact of the matter is that's not real. Some people may enjoy masculine activities, some people may enjoy feminine activities. There are people who fall outside the gender binary, because remember, that doesn't exist, who identify with a variety of different levels of masculinity and femininity. What the gender revolution is doing is it's bringing all of the gender identities that we have and saying, you know what? You're valid regardless of what other people say about your tendencies. You don't have to be a rough, tough man. The gender revolution is playing a major part in eliminating toxic masculinity. If you don't know what toxic masculinity is, look it up, but know that a lot of people who suffer from toxic masculinity comment online about it. Toxic masculinity is this overly aggressive, dominant male presence who mansplain. Y'all know what that is? Mansplaining is when you basically tell a woman. Yeah. Exactly. It's when you tell a woman something she already knows and pretend that you're teaching her. It's like me teaching math to a math teacher. I'm not good at math. What it's doing is it's saying, this is not necessarily how you need to live. The old adage that boys don't cry, the gender revolution is saying, yes, boys cry, and they should. They should be able to without persecution. The gender revolution is what's bringing pronouns to the forefront of the conversation. It's changing the way people talk about feminism. For the longest time, people were saying feminists are man-haters. I don't know why I did that. Feminism at its literal base is the equality of gender. The gender revolution is saying that's not just men and women. We need to be thinking about people who identify as agender or non-binary. They're equal too. And the gender revolution is changing the way we have those conversations. And the reason that this is possible, and what this also feeds, is the growth of a community. When I talk about the growth of the community, I am talking in part about social media. I know social media is the devil, how dare I get it. Yeah, no, it's not.
It's still this revolution.
There we go, thank you. A lot of people don't say that to me. When I talk about social media, it's connecting people across the world. I have the opportunity to share my experiences with people, and they have the opportunity to teach me. Social media is the reason that I know for sure that people in Brazil, queer people, are being told that they have to leave. They better leave or fear for their lives because of their last election. It's how people really found out about gay men being persecuted in Eastern Europe. Social media has been such an integral part of the queer movement. It's brought people together. There are gay apps. There are queer apps designed for queer people. That is amazing. Because if you had asked someone 10 years ago if there was anything designed specifically for queer people, they might have told you about like the one gay bar they once heard existed at some point. This is changing the way queer people can interact, and especially for younger people. Younger people who aren't in safe spaces to come out, don't know how to, who don't understand who they are yet. This is their way, their access, their doorway to meet other people who can help them, and that they can also provide insight to. This is what's been happening the last 10 years. So what's next? What can you all do? What can I do? What can we do? It's important to note that we've come a long way. We need to celebrate the little victories. Yeah, we're only represented 10% in TV shows and movies. But that is better than zero. That's better than me having 3 TV shows that I could see. Instead, I can go to the movies. I can turn on a lot of different shows, and I can see that. We need to celebrate those little things. But we need to acknowledge that there's a lot that needs to change. And the key to that change is allyship. The word ally has been long debated, what it means, what it does, all this kind of stuff. But an ally is someone who's outside of the queer community, who supports and advocates for the queer community. I want to make it very clear that I did not say on behalf of. Being an advocate and being an ally is not speaking as that person. What do I mean by that? If someone says something that is homophobic, biphobic, transphobic, something that is offensive to the queer community, instead of walking up to them and saying, hey, queer people don't like that, speaking on behalf of a queer person, say, hey, that makes me a little uncomfortable because I really don't think that that is an appropriate way to talk about different people. If you're interested in learning more, I'd love to sit down with you or introduce you to a friend of mine who can really go in depth. There's a difference there. One, you're claiming to speak on behalf of a community. The other one, you're saying, hey, I am supporting this community. And my support means that I have reactions to what you're doing. Allyship is so important because allies help give spaces to queer people. Queer people have fought long and hard to have space in this world. And so we need allies who have access to tons of other space to help carve out opportunities for queer people to speak. So what can you do right now? Well, it starts with small things. Being here tonight, supporting the Pinta Pride Project. It's donating your time or money to different queer organizations. It's joining PFLAG or doing some research and having conversations with people, supporting queer media. Stuff you can do right now. But there are so many long-term things that we need to do. Institutionally, gay marriage is legal, and that is unbelievable. I can tell you where I was, exactly what I was wearing, who I was with, who was the first person I told when gay marriage became legalized. It was that big of a deal. It came way later than it should, let's be honest, but it happened. And yet, there are still people who, they might be married, but they don't have all the rights of married people. They can't necessarily file joint tax returns, the most exciting thing you can do as a married couple. There are some that don't have access to some kind of medical rights. Some people can't even get a cake for their wedding. But hey, gay marriage is legal. There's so much more to do there. And then in our education system, I didn't know who Marsha P. Johnson was until I was 20 years old. Do y'all know who she is? No? Yeah, exactly. She is the woman that started the Stonewall Riot movement. She's a trans woman of color in 1969 who brought queerness to the free love movement in the 70s. And I didn't know about that? That's huge. Stonewall was a sentence in my social studies book in maybe like the 8th grade. So we need to be teaching queer history because it's not queer history, it's a part of history in general. So we need to be focusing on that. We need to have sex ed for gay kids. Don't even get me started with abstinence only, come on. But we need to teach kids that if you're gay, there's still ways to be safe. If you're queer, make sure you're taking care of yourself. Because there are a lot of people that go off, they go to college, they graduate college, and they have no idea. And that is terrifying. So we need to do these things. We need to support GSAs and queer alliances in our schools. That's the things that we can do right now. The things that you can do as an ally. And if you're a queer person in this room, whether you're out or you're not, or whether you're questioning, first of all, congratulations on being brave enough to be here tonight. That is, it takes a lot. It takes a lot to be who you are in the real world. Even to your friends and family who you know are going to love you. It takes so much to be there and to constantly be putting that out. When you're queer, the coming out process is not just a one-time thing. You do it every single day of your life. Do you know how much energy that takes away from a person? So if you're here tonight and you're queer, or you know someone that's queer, good on you for being strong enough. And we don't hear it enough as queer people. But hell yeah, we made it. Honestly. When I told my parents, it was at 8 a.m. and in Heinstein's Bagel when they were leaving, so I didn't even talk to them after. I remember it. Right? It was terrifying.
Yeah! Sorry.
So we need to support our queer friends, our queer neighbors, and if you don't know them, support them still. I don't need to explain how to be a decent human being, how to be an open-minded human being. Ally? Yeah, that's a good point. The fact that we might have to do that for people? How sad is that? Allies are so important to the queer community because queer people like myself, we can fight as hard as we want, but we need support. We need that support system. We need people to say, hey, what do you need from me? Because if you're an ally, the most important thing you can do is say, what can I do to support you? A lot of allies like to be super proactive, and that is amazing, but sometimes they bridge on that thing of speaking for the queer community. So if you don't know, ask. And while queer people don't owe you any answers, I promise you, they want you to help them as much as you want to help them. This is a queer movement that's been happening. It has been not just 10 years, it has been years and years and years. A movement needs progress. Progress needs support. The reason that we have Day of Silence is because we're honoring queer people who have committed suicide because they didn't have that. This is literally a matter of life and death. This is a movement that is giving people the opportunity to live and be themselves. We cannot afford to lose that momentum. Without that momentum, this movement dies. And speaking from who I am, this movement is the reason that I can stand here looking like this, talking about this, the reason that I even learned any of this. I don't want that to be taken away from other people. And obviously you don't either because you're here. And the fact that you're here is something that is so heartwarming to me, and even to queer people that you don't feel like you're making an impact on. This event touches so many lives, and you being here tonight is an amazing part of that. I know that was a lot of information for you all, but I want you to know till Sunday. No. So I wanted to thank you all for being here, for sitting there and listening to me, for letting a queer person like myself have space to exist and to talk. That is something that not all people get to experience. So thank you so much. I think we have time for a Q&A. I mean, I wrote it, so feel free to ask any questions, or if you have them written down, that's fine too. Yeah.
Morgan, you said earlier, to make a queer person feel comfortable, when you introduce yourself, say, I'm Rhonda Cohn, I identify as she. I've had a lot of people tonight, and I would never think to say that because, except for this room, people would look at me and go, what?
Absolutely.
Who would you say that to?
Everybody.
The question,
But
the answer
in
is
business, I mean,
everyone. We have to make it normal. Things don't change without pushing. If enough people are going out and doing it as a habit, yeah, you might get that one person who's like, that's weird, why did you do that? And then if you explain it, they just learned something. And they might go and say that to someone else. It's a domino effect in a way.
Where I agree, I've worked for CPAs, and when the clients come in, I've not met them. Hi, I'm Rhonda. Does it help me, Rhonda? But if I were to say to a client, hi, welcome, give me your tax papers, I identify as she, I would get in big trouble.
Absolutely.
So how would I handle that?
The first thing that I would say is neutral language. So, what I say by that is, I use the word y'all, not just because I've been in Texas for 5 years, or the fact that my father is Texan, but because it is inclusive. A lot of people like to say, ladies and gentlemen, or ma'am, or sir. Instead of doing that, don't. Try saying things, like I've heard some really funny ways to do it. If you're addressing a group that you're comfortable with, say, good evening, my friends and enemies. Like, remove gender from it altogether. Doing that is something that you can do in a professional setting without turning people away. It's such a small thing, but when you do that, to 99 people, it may not matter, but to that one person, it's going to mean the world. When I got to work with new students, my very first summer, I had a trans woman in a small cohort of mine. And I said, y'all, and hey, everyone. And then she sat down with me at one point, and she said that was really important to me. She said, because a lot of people just look at me as a man. And they say he and him. She said, but you didn't. You made me feel comfortable. I'm not just saying that to brag on myself. I'm saying those small little details that you can change. When someone comes in, instead of saying, good evening, ma'am, good evening, how are you? By eliminating that aspect, you're starting to develop a conversation and a habit that other people are going to pick up. I hope that helps. Yeah.
So isn't it a point of making sexuality so important? Because to me, it's not important.
So,
And you know what I mean? I'm saying, I accept you
as a human, yes, absolutely.
And I accept you as you, and everyone is.
So the important thing to know is ignorance is not the same thing as acceptance. So there's this thing, and the easiest way to explain this is there's this idea of being colorblind, which means I don't see race. The fact of the matter is, people have different experiences when they have different racial backgrounds. So you saying you're colorblind is coming from a good place, but you're eliminating the fact that someone is a person of color, and they go through something completely different. So when you talk about queer people and sexuality, we're at that point of saying, well, it doesn't matter. To you it might not, but in the grand scheme of things, where I live in Texas. I can literally be fired at any point because I'm queer. They don't need another reason. It's ridiculous. No, I'm really lucky. I live in Austin. It's likely not going to happen. But when we say that sexuality doesn't matter,
No, I'm not saying it didn't matter.
no, but that's sort of the sense, right? So
Because you're talking to people that are just, I think most of the people here are reasonable, and say, we love you for you.
And that's
Yeah,
a great
I get
mindset.
it.
It's just important to recognize that sexuality is an identity that someone holds. And by saying it doesn't matter, you're eliminating something that impacts my everyday life. Every time that I walk down the street, I know that people are going to look at me and make assumptions about me. I can't avoid that. So sexuality is a part of my everyday. And I love when people say, I accept you for you who you are. And I love that. But both of us have to recognize that the world isn't like that yet. And so we need to recognize that this is still a very political identity. So yeah, I mean, it's a double-edged sword in a way. Yeah.
I'm going to step in here for 1 second. Oh, I'm sorry. First of all, I had Morgan in class. I'm Carolyn Pinta. It's so nice to meet you all, and I'm sorry. This child is not a child anymore, but when I had this child, she was this friendly, tiny little thing. And I cannot believe how well you speak. I am. For her teacher who had her when she was 12 to listen to her talk this way. You are unbelievable. If she is possible.
Yeah, anytime.
I bet you all might have questions for her. I bet she's sticking around. I bet you are sticking
I'll
around.
be here to answer questions, and if you don't feel comfortable asking, just feel free
Write
to write it down.
Morgan a question.
And you can
Yeah.
bring it to one of those people in the back, those two.
One of those.
They're my parents. Or, feel free to come up to you or mom, that's okay, and give them the cards. I'll be happy to address them and answer them, so feel free to ask me any questions throughout the rest of the night. I'll be here.